It's like, oh crap.
It's almost swearing in.
Oh yeah, but you guys had a hell of a program out there, thanks to Peter and Nancy. I mean, it was just very. Everybody else in the state, I think, was really envious as to what you guys had available to you from an educational standpoint.
Oh, wow, that's really something.
Yeah,
All we were doing is trying to improve on a system that, needed various changes,
yep.
and the rest, needless to say, is history.
Yeah, well, I think what's really comical is that when a bunch of us became paramedics finally in 79 or 80, I forget what year it was. Anyway, when we got really complicated calls, a bunch of us would get on the truck together because we weren't sure what the hell we were doing.
You're bound to find somebody that knew what was going on.
You got it, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was the beauty that, we very seldom ran into, because a lot of our critical care calls, Nancy would show up on. She would just get in another vehicle and come to the scene. And a lot of it was more or less to precept what we were doing, as opposed to actually jumping in hands-on and stuff like that.
Well, you were lucky because Peter got you into the ORs to do intubations.
Oh, man.
And we did that in Bucks County probably until I left the country in 85. I went out of the country for 2 years, but we were able to do that until the early 80s. And then all of a sudden the insurance companies for the hospitals said, oh, no, you cannot have paramedics in the operating room dropping tubes every morning.
You're absolutely correct. And that
but it was great.
Yeah, that was the best training you could be put under, because it was a stressful environment. You was actually using a salvageable person.
Sure.
And it was almost all eyes were on you.
Yep.
And Peter Safar had an aura around him. Whenever he walked in the room, it became quiet.
Yeah, he was sort of a legend, no question about it. It's funny, Sam Scheinberg and I were chatting yesterday, and he had mentioned in an interview with some guys yesterday that he mentioned me and said, you're a legend in EMS. And I said, I'm president of the EMS Museum, and there are days I'm wondering if I'm president or an artifact.
Yeah, I can understand that. I really can.
And then Sam said, yeah, most people refer to me as a fossil. So,
well, you haven't been labeled a dinosaur. Yourself,
I hear you, man.
But
John, how old are you now?
71.
71. Oh crap! I got you beat by 6 years. I'm 77, buddy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You look good for 77. Keep it up. What's your secret?
Yeah, man. I run too fast. That's it. Age doesn't catch up to me.
Understood. Good luck with that.
All right, Miss Christie, when do we want to start this? What is the official countdown?
A while. I was worried about technical glitches like we had last week, so.
All right.
Feel free to, I don't know.
Are you still out in Pittsburgh?
What'd you say?
Are you still out in Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
You ever run into my old buddy Walt Stoy at all?
I talked to him this morning, as a matter of fact.
Very good.
Yeah, with his
good people.
White hair and his white beard, and
yeah.
I actually talked to Walt Stoy this morning.
Cool.
He's still kind of associated with the Center for Emergency Medicine.
Yeah.
I was on a meeting with him for a couple of hours and stuff like that.
Well, when next you speak with him, tell him I said hi.
Okay, I definitely will.
He's good people.
Will.
You're talking about white hair. White hair, I'm familiar with that. White beard, I got rid of when I came back to the States. Now, I guess about 5 years after I came back to the States, I ended up with a position as EMS director and a public safety officer. So I was firefighter, EMT, and cop all combined.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Since I was using SCBA, I had to get rid of the beard.
Yeah, absolutely.
I shaved off the beard And everybody said, crap, you look 10 years younger. I said, okay, that's the end of the beard. No more beard.
That's true. I experienced that. It took me 7 years to grow my beard.
Yeah.
And my first day on the job with the city of Pittsburgh, it had to be gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was not a very experience, removing 7 years worth of hair off my face. But
well, when Christy gives us the heads up, I want to ask about the history of Freedom House, how it started in '67, what brought it together, and then I want to ask you about how blessed you guys were to be basically in a hospital-based system, and what Peter did to mentor you all and how you were mentored. And then lo and behold, Nancy came along.
Correct.
Talk about a blessing. Guys, my God, a resident comes in, and then of course she then ran off with Mogan David Adom and went to Israel. So, but, and I don't know that I want to get into the demise of Freedom House EMS at all. I think I just want to, unless you want to get into it, but I think that was a very unfortunate development. But
well, that's the point. And if you look at the historical perspective, which I often do, and been doing quite frequently over the last year, 2 years, is that the way Freedom House was designed, and this is just me talking, it was designed to fail. And
really?
Yeah, because is if you want something to not succeed, what you do is you put people in it that are least likely to succeed.
Yeah.
And plus, it came along at a time where the federal government was farming out money to try and combat the racism in the inner city. So we're going to funnel, X number of thousands or millions of dollars into, say, Pittsburgh for entrepreneurship, for businesses and things like that. Freedom House Ambulance Service was an offshoot of a business. And the interesting thing about that is it became the core component of the business. And it's the vision of a good friend of mine by the name of Phil Hallen, who at the time was president of the Maurice Falk Medical Fund.
Right.
So with him having the contacts with Presbyterian Hospital, who in turn with Dr. Saffer, it put the board of directors of Freedom House all on the same concept to let them know, okay, here's what we want for our own community, because this is what's missing, and how can we better improve pre-hospital care in the community, transportation, back and forth from doctor's appointments to home, inter-hospital transports, and increase employment. Yeah. So all of those entities were met for a period of roughly about 7 years. And it wasn't an easy road to hoe, for lack of a better term. What Freedom House didn't anticipate is getting caught up in the political environment.
Getting caught up in what, I'm sorry?
The political.
Oh, yeah, you think?
it was unable to compete in that arena.
Yeah.
Saffer attempted to do it. He tried, but while he was trying, he made more enemies than he did friends.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, the political winds started shifting, and it started shifting away from what we were doing and the roles that we were playing, in an effort to still let you know that I'm the person in charge. I can, remove your financial backing.
Yeah.
So, or if I don't remove it, I'll delay it to a point where it becomes a struggle. So Freedom House, during its latter stages, was kind of built on fiscal quicksand. A grant here, and that made it very problem for it to survive.
Yeah. I think since both of us are from EMS in its infancy in Pennsylvania, one of the things that I think you probably have observed, and I sure as hell did, is that all the people that ended up at the county levels in charge of EMS couldn't even spell it. I mean, they had no idea what the hell we were all about. They were cast off civil defense employees in most of the counties that really didn't have a mission any longer. And now they're running EMS systems for the counties in Pennsylvania. I don't think until Joe Schmieder became state EMS director that Pennsylvania had anybody in charge in Harrisburg that knew a damn thing about EMS and even understood it.
And that's true. And it's interesting that you alluded to that, because it was the same way, unfortunately, when the city of Pittsburgh EMS came into existence.
Yeah.
And I was just talking about this today. It brought employees in from a suburban environment, and for which they were ill-equipped to operate in. So as a result of that, they came in with preconceived notions on what to expect, or maybe someone may have told them, or what have you, an urban environment would be like.
What do you mean, John? Do you think there's a difference between rural EMS and urban EMS?
It's a very small difference. It's a very small difference. And you're very, very small difference.
Yeah, right.
They had a very tough time adjusting to that. And what happened is they probably wouldn't have adjusted to it had it not been from a cadre of Freedom House people coming over and being a part of that organization. Because what ended up happening as a result of that ill-conceived notion is they started stereotyping certain neighborhoods. And it's based on a racial prejudicial type of system that they had no real concept of how to deal with it. An example would be, and these are things that I were involved in firsthand, so I know they existed. If you wanted say a heart attack or a stroke or a diabetic emergency or what have you, that only occurred in affluent upper class or middle class white neighborhoods. If you wanted to deal with, say, drug overdoses and seizures and gunshot wounds and things of that nature, then your best bet, the way to do that is to get on a unit that handles the predominantly African-American neighborhoods. And oftentimes, that's what they were taught in the various paramedic classes. And at that, a lot of the employees came in with the notion that they're coming into a war zone, for lack of a better term.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I'll bring with me my gun, which I'll somehow hide under the seat of the truck, or I'll have a knife, or and unfortunately, you know, the administration at that time had the same idea, so they kind of perpetuated that between 7-cell flashlights to the paramedics. They also gave them a preconceived idea that because you were a paramedic with the city of Pittsburgh EMS, that along with that job came a certain amount of authority.
Yeah.
And so it would be nothing for an ambulance to chase a car down the street because they ran a stop sign. To a ticket, but they would yell at them. And at that time, they were dressed the same as police officers.
Right.
So I give that same type of preconceived notion to the general public.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of that stuff had to change, and it wasn't an overnight change. It was a gradual transition. And one of the things that I did while I was there when I first came over, first of all, they disregarded any type of training or experience I had. So it was almost like I was the third person on the crew, and I had to learn patient care from the crew members that I was dealing with. So, you know, I had all this experience, was taught by the best, obviously with Sapper and Caroline and things like that. So all that stuff was kind of taken away from me. And truth be told, the only way I was able to get it back, and you kind of alluded to that, is we went on a life-threatening call one day, and we walked in, and it was, to me, it was a simple cardiac arrest. But the crews had never dealt with it. They never had a, I mean, I can show you how to do CPR on the mannequin and stuff like that, but I done forgot the mannequin's name though. But Annie, there's so many Annies that you could deal with. And that's what they were accustomed to.
Yeah.
So now we have this human being here that's unconscious, not breathing, and doesn't have a heartbeat. So what do? And ironically, I look back at the person with the most experience and say, hey, you take over. So, which happened to be me, but up until that time, I was the third wheel on the crew, and they had no idea on how to deal with it. Yep. So I had to, you know, kind of manage this cardiac arrest.
Yep.
And I ended up assigning duties and responsibilities and things like that. So that was my indoctrination to let me know that I was working with individuals that they were just brought in, and whatever type of training they received, we didn't know because I was still at Freedom House at the time.
Yeah.
Was not actual patient care.
Yeah.
You know, you can sit in the ER and tell them sort an IV here and there, but you know, that's about it.
Sure. John, can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Maybe Christy will agree with this. Can you get your camera tilted down just a little bit so we see more of you and less of the chandelier?
Okay, let's see if we can.
Yeah, that's cool.
There we go.
Is that better?
Let's see.
Okay.
Beautiful. Much better.
Okay,
Much
good.
better. Christy was too bashful to suggest that, but she is pretty bashful most of the time.
Yep, I'm a quiet wallflower. Don't do anything. I know John has a couple of good stories about training once he moved into working with the city of Pittsburgh. So if there's time, we might want to dive into what he's done for training, education, building curriculum.
Since Freedom House, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I had to laugh when you were talking about the difference between rural and urban. When I had been a volunteer firefighter for, God, I guess 10 years or more. No, more than that, 12 years by the time I graduated from college. And I became a fighter up in Westchester County because I was headed into the Navy within the next year.
Mm-hmm.
So I found out, whispered down the alley, that I could go down and ride with the 18th Battalion because the battalion chief was actually lived in the area where I was a firefighter. So any days I wasn't working in Westchester County, I was riding with probably the busiest engine company in the city of New York on East 168th Street.
Oh, wow.
Contrasting urban to rural. I walk into the station the first night I'm down there, and I've got all my bunker gear under my arm. And I walk into the station, and the chief looks at me and he says, "Where's your bunker gear?" I said, "It's right here under my arm, Chief." He said, "Do you have any idea what kind of neighborhood this is?" I said, "No, what are you talking about, Chief?" He said, "That goddamn hat goes on your head when you are walking to the station, not under your arm, because they'll throw shit off of the roof to see if they can kill you."
Mm-hmm.
I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, isn't that special?" You know, we're not the good guys.
And I, you know, I can very easily share those concerns firsthand, and they were because the people experienced culture shock.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and it was pretty evident based on the way they treated individuals.
Yep.
Freedom House had specific areas in which it serviced, and you know, it was restricted to the African American neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And when we received a call for assistance, regardless of what the problem was or what have you, we subsequently came, took care of the person, and transported them to the hospital. Once we dissolved Freedom House, I went to a system that could pick and choose who they wanted to transport to the hospital. And they did it under the disguise of no medical emergency, which simply said that based on what your problem is, I, as a paramedic, don't deem it to be serious enough to go into the back of my truck. So you have to get to the emergency room the best way you can. And that was a big adjustment for me, but it was built into the system. And here we had 1, 2, or 3 trucks transporting anybody and everybody. And here we have a ultra modern day, as they call them, super ambulances, deciding whether they should or should not transport.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was more or less selective retreat. So it's amazing how we've kind of grown from that. And there was, you know, very little justification they had to give.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I've been gone for 10 years, but you had to all but justify why you didn't transport this chest pain to the, or this hypertensive crisis to the emergency. And it's a real testament to how EMS has evolved into what it is today. And you know, the city of Pittsburgh has a fantastic system, and it's improving every day. I talked to 3 of their MDocs today, and they have high hopes on what they want to institute into the system.
Yeah.
But up until that time, there really wasn't a lot of checks and balances going on. You had one medical director, and he was out at Forbes Regional, and he had to run the emergency room as well as listen to suburban ambulances, not necessarily the city of Pittsburgh, but any old Churchill, East Pittsburgh, Wilkinsburg, anybody that came through there. And so it kind of put the system on pins and needles, but you know, it was able to escape from those times. And fast forward to the city of Pittsburgh system, which I still, you know, love and appreciate, including the system as well as people. It had a very, very serious diversity problem. Because remember, once you brought Freedom House's personnel over, there was a system unbeknownst to us, was a weeding out type of process. And then it put everybody in a survival of the fittest mode. And the way to get rid of anybody you want to get to is prove to them they can't do the job. And you do that by constantly testing them and testing them and testing them and things like that. So naturally, the people that you want to get rid of and the few you have left is what you deal with. And, you know, that put me in a kind of precarious position because I knew how this whole system began. I knew what it could do. And the skills and knowledge of the people that work there. But the problem being is I was now in a system where I had very little say-so. And as a result of that, you had to take things for what they were, face value-wise. And I made myself a promise while I was there that if I ever got into a position where I could make a change the outlook or the face of Pittsburgh EMS, that I was going to devote my career to do that. So fast forward, I start removing different obstacles and barriers that were specifically designed to block any effort of diversity. And as Christy said, one of them was EMT training. And it's interesting that you said you were a volunteer fire person.
Yeah.
And yeah. I do know that in an effort to get into an EMT program, you had to be a volunteer firefighter. It had to be sponsored by a volunteer firefighter.
Oh, you know, I look over in Eastern Pennsylvania. I did not get paid to do anything in EMS from 1970 until 1980, probably 83 was the first time I got any compensation of any kind for what I did in EMS. And that included riding on 2 paramedic units in 2 different parts of the county, one of which was hospital-based. And as you guys in Pittsburgh experienced with Freedom House, that was the best way to operate, because when you weren't on the truck, you were in the emergency room taking care of patients, and it was just cool. I mean, you really learned how to manage patients.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
Because even being hospital-based, in the event that they had emergency transports that needed to be
interfacility transfers, sure, you bet, with very critical patients. Yeah.
Already there.
And that stood me in very good stead when I ended up in the Virgin Islands, because I was flying a lot of patients out of St. Thomas over to Centro Medico in San Juan or to the VA in San Juan, and they were almost all critical, very critical. So anyway, are we ready to go? boss?
We are technically 1 minute, so I was just trying to set this up and hope we're good. Two
Now, do you have the band?
things.
You have the band ready to go to introduce us and so on? I mean,
I hope so. The conductor is sleeping behind me, so
oh, good, yeah.
we'll
Well,
see.
my cat
Okay.
is behaving herself.
I hear you.
Here's hoping she doesn't start dreaming. She snores and woofs a lot when she starts dreaming. Yeah, so we're 4:30 now. There's about a 10-second delay, so maybe give it a good count to 10 before we start talking. But yeah, I can certainly.
John, this is like we haven't talked at all this afternoon, by the way. That's how this starts.
I mean, or pick up where you left off, whatever. It's all being recorded. I will be monitoring for questions, so if questions pop up,
Okay.
I may, at the end, appear again, but I'm going to turn my camera off, so it's just a conversation between you two, or
Cool.
that's how it's kind of presenting.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to press the go live button. Let's hope this works.
Yep.
Excellent. We are live here at the National EMS Museum. Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. It seems like we just saw you, but it has actually been 2 weeks since our first conversation here with Denny Hare, and I am so fortunate enough to introduce a good friend of the museum, Assistant Chief John Moon, who started his career at Freedom House Ambulance Service. So we're going to dive into a bit of that, a bit of working the streets in Pittsburgh, and hopefully you guys will save us some time to talk about the Freedom House exhibit that the National EMS Museum is going to do for next year. But I've already divulged too much, so I am going to turn it over to Doc Clinchy, our president, and Chief Moon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, John. Delighted to have you with me here today.
Appreciate the opportunity.
I want to go all the way back to the white paper in 1996. That's sort of, I think, the genesis of a lot of what a lot of us did back in those days.
Yes.
How, based on that, and how did freedom into existence? Let's start there.
Well, that's an interesting concept, primarily because if you're going back to the early 60s, there was racial strife throughout the country itself, various problems with the inner city communities, primarily African-American communities, where there was lack of jobs, lack of opportunities for jobs, lack of an opportunity to, say, open up businesses and things of that nature. So the government as a whole tried to impact that by creating different job training programs to offset the disparity that was occurring in the Black community during the 60s, because there was a lot of discontent going on throughout the country. So the government itself had to do something about that. So it created a lot of different job training programs and a lot of different educational programs, things such as training for construction jobs and even hospital jobs and office jobs and things that would give the Black community an opportunity to not only train for these particular jobs, but to actually be hired by the respective companies themselves. The construction industry at that time was rather booming, and a lot of individuals got into the training for construction jobs and things like that. One little unknown project was business entrepreneurship, which was rather bleak in the Black community at that time. Mm-hmm. So money actually was funneled to offset that also. Hence came Freedom House, which was an incorporated business. And the business was to almost open up a supermarket to distribute food to needy families and things of that nature, with the hopes that they would somehow be able to contribute back into the community. Now, as a result of that, a good friend of mine by the name of Phil Howland, who went to Harvard, and he had worked in a hospital-based ambulance service. They were not EMS at that time, and came to Pittsburgh to take a position with the Salk Medical Fund. And as he became president of that fund, he developed the concept that, okay, I have these small businesses in the African-American community, primarily the Hill District, that are distributing food to residents and offering transportation to doctor's appointments and things like that. And he came up with the idea that why can't we issue medical care? Why can't we get them to the hospital in the time of an emergency? Because during that time, you had to rely on the police. And not to disparage them, there was very little training. The police oftentimes would take their time coming to get you, primarily in the Black neighborhoods. And once they got there, there was no pre-hospital treatment whatsoever.
No.
So subsequently, you were placed in the back of a paddy wagon, a canvas cot, and both individuals got up front. And heaven forbid, you stopped breathing while you were back there. Oftentimes, you were DOA at the hospital.
Yeah.
So my friend Phil Howland came up with this idea on how to improve that type of service. And he pitched his idea to the board of directors of Freedom House Incorporated. And they readily accepted it because you couldn't even get a cab to come into community at that time. So you were more or less left to your own devices.
Right.
Get there the best way you can, whenever you can. So they bought the idea, they bought into it, but it took a little bit more than that. Okay, we are buying into this idea, so we're gonna need some help. We're gonna need some direction. We're gonna need some guidance on how to implement this. Phil Howland also knew the Presbyterian University Hospital, who in turn knew Peter Saffer. And he was able to get all the parties involved. At that time, Peter Saffer was looking for a way to improve on CPR, improve on the decrease of mortality rate upon arriving in the emergency room and the hospital.
I think just to interrupt you momentarily, I think a lot of the young people don't even know refer to Peter Saffer as the father of CPR.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. He designed it. So, and what he was looking for is some type of vehicle to improve on his research. Yeah. He was also looking to, because he was president of the Allegheny County Medical Society at that time too, so he was looking for a way to institute a better way to improve on the mortality rate of individuals coming into the hospital. He had an inside track on that, but he didn't have a vehicle to which to implement it. And henceforth, once he sat down with the board of directors of Freedom House, along with Phil Howland, as well as the director or president of Presbyterian University Hospital at that time.
Was that Edward Norian?
Ed Norian,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He was able to convince the powers to be that if you give me the people to train, I'll train them to be the very best pre-hospital care technicians that they could be. And subsequently, They agreed, but Freedom House had no idea on where to get the individuals. So they did a massive recruiting drive, primarily for residents of the Hill District. And subsequently, they ended up with a class of about 25 individuals. And it was a very intense class where Dr. Saffer was the medical director, along with Dr. Don Benson. They put together a curriculum for these individuals. And subsequently, it involved the emergency room, it involved the operating room, it involved the delivery, as well as some psychiatric components built into it also.
And
so,
what year was that?
68.
68.
Yeah, 1968, he implemented this training program.
To put that into perspective, that was 12 years ahead of the rest of Pennsylvania doing the same kind of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So he kind of was able to introduce that, and the first class of trainees hit the streets in the latter part of 1968, sometime around July, August of 1968. And it was quite an eye-opening experience because shortly prior to that, there was the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. So there was a lot of rioting going on in the Hill District and through other communities. And the personnel of Freedom House was kind of introduced directly into that. And it was because they would be able to go into areas that perhaps the police were not going into because of the danger, or even the National Guard, who was on standby at that time. So if someone was injured or someone was sick, Freedom House would go in. And the interesting thing about that, and it's actually talked about in the documentary, that when Freedom House went into a particular neighborhood, particularly at night, they left the lights on in the back of the vehicle. So if I'm out here
I get it.
Projectiles, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
I see who's in this vehicle, so I'm a little hesitant to do that. So they were able to come in and transport critically ill people out without any problems whatsoever.
Yeah.
And see, that became the norm with them. Now, what also came about during that time frame too was the auspices that, okay, well, we got the system into the Hill District and they're getting federal money, maybe we can expand it. And they came up with the idea that during the day you have an inordinate amount of people into downtown Pittsburgh. So they were approached by the mayoral administration to saying, we will give you X number of thousands of dollars to provide emergency care into downtown Pittsburgh. Subsequently, Freedom House expanded into the downtown area. Then they expanded into Oakland under a grant from what they call the Model Cities Program, which is another federally funded grant. They were primarily restricted to downtown Oakland and the Hill District. And for a number of years, those were the only areas that surfaced. What happened during that time, and you and I talked about it, is they also did pre-hospital transports. Right. From home to doctor's appointments, from hospital to hospital. They even did neonatal transport, say from maybe West Virginia to McGee and things. So these were things that we see today are almost like multi-million-dollar businesses. But Freedom House did that back in 1968.
right.
as a routine type of system. And that continued for 7 or 8 years until the political winds started to change. And despite the fact that Dr. Saffer was still trying to pitch the idea of expanding freedom of the communities, it wasn't accepted very well by not only the medical community, meaning Allegheny County Medical Society, or the political administration at that time. So he kind of made some enemies on both sides of that fence.
Yeah.
Because the coroner at that time was Dr. William Hunt, and he was obviously a practicing physician. Even the fact that Governor Lawrence died in the back of a police wagon, suffered irreversible brain damage while at a fundraising event at Soldiers and Sailors and was police. That was not enough to improve on emergency care.
So let me fast forward just a little bit. In 1973, Peter got a new resident into his program by the name of Nancy Caroline.
Absolutely.
Nancy Caroline, I think her book, Emergency Care in the Streets, is probably the Bible that most of us who subsequently became paramedics were trained out of. What role did Nancy have in making the Freedom House program even better?
Well, she came in with a lot of skepticism, meaning from the people that were there. Because what had happened on a routine basis is a lot of physicians and other types of specialty people that come and used Freedom House as a training ground or to build their resume on. And then they would get the credentials together and move on to another place or go start another EMS system and things of that nature. So when she came in, there was skepticism. You're sending this white woman in here and the same thing's going to happen. You're going to come in here and pad your resume and next thing you will be gone. She came in scared to death because she had never envisioned being and subsequently she was. So that was a kind of feeling out phase, even though we had white employees working there, 2, 3, or 4, they were still the minority at the time because Freedom House started out all Black. But when Nancy came in, that was this feeling out type of system. So she had to fill us out and we had to fill her out. And that was a level of trust that had to be transferred on lives.
So you made a believer out of her.
Absolutely. and interesting that you said that, primarily because there was a compassion side of her that we had not seen.
Yeah. Yep.
And she did not come in to kind of take advantage of a system. She came in after a period of time and started embracing the people that worked there. She understood the trials and tribulations and barriers and things that we had to go through. And so there was that compassionate side of her said, well, okay, I see what I have here to work with and I can change this. I can change the perception. I can change the morale. I can change their outlook and things like that. And the way I can do that is to show them I'm not those other individuals that came through.
Yeah.
I genuinely care for each and every one of you. And once she was able to convince us that that's why she was there, was to make us better, everything else kind of just flowed. We took her everywhere we went. I mean, that was oftentimes we'd take her to lunch at a restaurant in the Hill, and she'd go in and eat soul food So there was a cultural change that was going on that she had not experienced before, because she walked into a culture where the majority of the guys there had afros and they had beards, present company included.
Yep.
So that was our identity at that particular time, and that was the norm, what you would expect. And that's what she had to look at once she came through the door. But push comes to shove, once she established that level of trust, it was a lot easier for her, and it was a lot more pleasant for us because we had to relinquish that doubt.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is what she learned about the Freedom House program really became the blueprint for emergency care on the streets and probably paramedic training nationwide to a large extent.
And that's true because she, at the time, had ridden with us, I would say roughly about a year and a half. And unbeknownst to us, she had applied for a grant through the U.S. Department of Transportation to upgrade our system.
Mm-hmm.
And that was contingent upon her writing the manual to upgrade emergency care, pre-hospital care, period, not just in Freedom House. And what she was able to do is utilize Freedom Houses as a vehicle, not meaning the trucks themselves, but the overall system, to implement that process. So we had an advantage, and you mentioned hospital base, we had an advantage of having a personal relationship with our medical director.
Yep.
She worked 24 hours a day. She was on the radio 24 hours a day. When we had a critical care call, she would respond to it, not necessarily to intervene in any way, because we had already built up that confidence in her that no matter what the problem was, trained us to be able to take care of it. So her role at that time was more or less observe to like, okay, I got confidence in you that you could do A, B, C, D, and E. And sometimes some of the calls were out of the ordinary. I particularly remember one on the Fort Duquesne Bridge where I had to climb a 15 feet high fence because there was a cardiac arrest over on the other side. And the common sense thing is you climb to get to the other side, you're gonna climb down to get, but me and my infinite wisdom climbed up and jumped down. The problem with that is it was on a narrow walkway with a guardrail, and then you had the river, Monongahela or Point, I get them all mixed up, on the other side. So I didn't have much room. Most of the sidewalks are like 3 feet wide, if that, 42 inches. And I somehow landed down there, which was the wrong thing to do, the most stupidest thing to do. And so subsequently, nobody else did it.
God, back in those days, we were immortal. We could do anything, right?
So we thought. But as I look back on those times, they were fun times. Primarily because we had already developed a very close-knit relationship with her. The fear factor was gone. The untrust factor was gone. And there was camaraderie between her and every person that worked there. So we had a distinct advantage. During that time also, even though we were setting the trend and things like that outside of Freedom House, to include trainees from community college who subsequently came in to do their ride-alongs with us. The ironic thing about that is all of them were white males. So subsequently, they became the minority. And I, distinctly remember one particular individual that came onto my, I was on the steady 4012 ship, scared to death. I mean, just terrified. Set off in a corner and just, I could see the fear in his face. So I subsequently kind of took him under my wings and kind of guided him on what to do and how to do it and things like that. Because he was embarking on a real life system in an environment that he wasn't accustomed to, because suburban, urban transition. And to this day, he recognized the fact that if I had not taken him under my wings and kind of made him feel comfortable and welcome, you don't think he would have completed the program. And push comes to shove, he completed the paramedic training and went on to become the chief of Pittsburgh EMS. And
so you gave him some pretty good tutoring then, I would say, huh?
So needless to say, he was rather beholden.
So Freedom House EMS essentially wrapped up in 1975 because
Yes.
the city
Yes.
took EMS.
Yes.
Now let's take you. What happened to you after 1975 relative to EMS?
Well, unbeknownst to me at the time, I went to the city of Pittsburgh EMS with about 25, 30 other Freedom House employees. It was a rather traumatic transition, one in which we wasn't necessarily welcomed, one in which we were not made to feel part of a team, part of the crew, and one in which all of the experience and training that we had garnered under Caroline was not accepted, none of it. And subsequently, I had to undergo a battery of tests, had to do internships in the emergency room and the various hospitals and things to supposedly get my certification. But the real...
You went through the Paramedic 1, Paramedic 2 route to Pennsylvania, right?
All over again.
There was a well-designed system.
All over again. But the intent purpose of it was not to see whether I could do the job. It was to get rid of me. That was the intent purpose. That was the mechanism that was actually used to weed out the employees that came over from Freedom.
But do you realize, John, that that same kind of thing still exists? I have fought for years. We're still a separate organization with the State EMS Directors Association. And I would say, why is it that an 18 Delta out of the military comes into your state, says he wants to become a paramedic, and you hand him a list of training centers? I said, these kids have been through a superb advanced life support training program. But I don't even know if today any states grant them admission without having them jump through a lot of unnecessary hoops.
And that's true. I was very instrumental in the hiring process for the city of Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And actually, I was the guy during the late 80s up until roughly about 2000 as far as hiring. And I had developed a rapport with the personnel department and things like that. So that was a connect there.
Cool.
The people that we hired subsequently had to go through our orientation program. And it wasn't in a way to discredit them in any kind of way. It was actually to get them to understand this is the way we did things. So that's the difference between what I had to go through once I transitioned versus an employee coming from another service or what have you. Just to let you know, at the time during the transition, Freedom House to the city of Pittsburgh, the city's administration had entered into an agreement with Freedom House that once the employees that came over that were already trained to the level of paramedic, that they did not have to undergo any additional training in reference to the job duties and responsibilities and stuff like that. And that agreement was violated. And it was relatively easy to violate primarily because we didn't know it existed. I didn't know it existed or anything. So that was like, it wasn't like I had something to fall back on, but you said this is written here. So I had to basically just go through it. And one of the things that I did when I came over, I wanted to let every person there know that I could do that job. And I had done it for a number of years, and I was very good at it. And it subsequently afforded me opportunities for advancement and things like that. But what I did notice at the time is that the department remained a steady influx of white males coming in and things like that. And I started thinking, well, what's wrong with this picture? Primarily because you were with an organization that essentially created this type of system. And now you have become a minority in a system that you essentially have created. At the time I was doing all that thinking, there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. So what I did is I made myself a promise that if I ever got into it, that I could make a change, that I was going to devote the remaining part of my career to implement those changes. Fast forward to the fact that up until 1990, 89, Pittsburgh EMS had a total of 6 African Americans on its workforce out of 162 people. It reached back in my mind and said, you know, John, remember your promise. So I subsequently voiced my concerns with my administration, and I had to come up with a plan to implement it. What I didn't know at the time is how much resistance I was going to have to deal with. Resistance from the collective bargaining unit, resistance from the paramedics in the field, resistance from administrative people that I've worked with for years and things. What they didn't know at the time is that the more you resisted me, the more determination I became. So subsequently, I was afforded the opportunity to design a diversity recruitment program for the city of Pittsburgh EMS. Now, the ironic thing about that is police and fire had their own diversity problems, but they didn't have any type of way or remedy to offset it other than for the police, federal court consent decree and that was their vehicle. But I designed one for the city of Pittsburgh EMS. And despite all the different obstacles and hurdles, and I mean things such as carving racially bad stuff on the bathroom doors in the emergency room of hospitals, and I mean directed at me personally. So it was nothing to go into, say, West Bend Hospital and see John Moon's name carved in the door and, you know, some racial epitaph script next to it. Richard got so bad that my boss had to instruct or request from the hospital security. The city of Pittsburgh EMS unit went into the emergency room to check the bathrooms to see whether there was any new writings put on there. Subsequently, we were able to get 15 individuals. And that wasn't an entirely African-American class because I was working on diversity, so it had to be males, females from both races. But the majority of them be African-American because that was a problem that we were necessarily having. So we got these individuals in class and they went to the Center for Emergency Medicine and they were able to complete the class. And the ironic thing about it is I was able to convince the political environment at that time, which had changed hands multiple times, that when I go out and get these people and bring them into training, I want to have some kind of way to compensate them. It was easy to come up with these ideas to pay them, but I had no idea where the money was coming from. So my boss, who had done his internship with me at Freedom House, started shaking a couple of trees and calling in favors with friends. And we were able to come up with a couple of $100,000 to train them in the EMT program and pay them to go. Once they completed that, they were implementing a program with an increase in pay. And once they completed that program, I was able to convince the city of Pittsburgh, saying, you invested, say, $75,000 into this person's career. Do you really want them to go work for Mount Lebanon or Wilkins Township or Forest Hills or whatever? So I was able to convince them to hold positions open for them once they completed the training. So that was incentive for them to complete the training. Completed it. To transition was easy because they were brought up in the Pittsburgh system. So that made the orientation periods a lot shorter. That worked very well all while I was there. And what I didn't know at the time is I came in as a paramedic. A year later, I got promoted to crew chief. A couple of years after that, I was a field supervisor. 12 years after that, I was promoted to what they call chief supervisor. So I had responsibilities for the total day-to-day operations of the system. And unbeknownst to me at that time, that was as far as I was ever going to go. Didn't know.
You know, you and I are we've reached the age, I guess, where we sometimes look at legacy. Mm-hmm. And I look at the people at Freedom House, Edward Norian and Phil and Peter Sackler and Nancy Caroline and yourself, John Moon. What do you think the legacy of Freedom House is to EMS in Pittsburgh and EMS in general?
That's a very interesting question. And I saw a picture of a vehicle a couple of days ago, a Freedom House ambulance. And it was parked outside of Presbyterian's emergency department. And I started at this vehicle and I started looking at it. There was rust along the bottom of it. The tires, there was no hubcaps, and they were partially bald and stuff like that. And I got to thinking, I said, to the average person, this looks like a Freedom House ambulance. But to me, it is a symbol of how to overcome different obstacles, different trials, different tribulations, different barriers that are placed in front of a group of individuals to prevent them from succeeding. That's not an ambulance. And obviously, if you don't know anything about Freedom House, you don't know what we had to deal with. But that's what that vehicle symbolizes to me. And, you know, I do wish, and it's my hope, that this legacy will carry on and on and on long after I have left this face of the earth. One of the things that I tried to do as part of this maintaining this legacy is I was able to get city council to put the emblems on the side of the city of Pittsburgh EMS units. Freedom House Ambulance Service, 1968 to 1975 and 1967 to 1975. And I wanted that to be a permanent fixture. Just yesterday, I seen one of the vehicles that didn't have that. And usually whenever I see one, that's what I look for. And so I'm going to have to revisit that idea.
It would be rather fitting, John. And I don't know how many people are going to watch this conversation you and I have had, but maybe if we could encourage each of them to write a letter to the City of Pittsburgh administration suggesting that.
Sure.
And to move that idea forward. What do you think?
I think that's a fantastic idea. I would love to see that. And you know, you're absolutely correct. You would expect it to come from me, but I'm just an ordinary citizen now, and I
understand.
That's been a big adjustment that I had to make.
I hear you.
I would love to see that also, and I think what probably will come out of this is history of EMS to be included in every EMT and or paramedic training program. I want the history of EMS to be included in every emergency room physician is a specialty now. And I want the history of EMS because that's who you're going to see if you specialize in as an emergency room physician. And I want the history of EMS included in part of their orientation or training or whatever the case is. And that way, that legacy will remain because there was a lot of sacrificing that went on. And unfortunately, some of the individuals that work there are no longer with us. But I don't want them to be forgotten. And that's why I'm rather passionate about trying to keep this dream or this vision alive.
Well, I totally agree with you as to where we go from a legacy standpoint. John, I really want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
I hope lots of people hear the story of Freedom House and understand where it fits in where we are in EMS today. And again, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it.
Take care of yourself.
You too.
Well, thank you both. Before we let anybody go, I have to share this, and it's just a little green binder, so it doesn't look very impressive sitting on the shelf, but it is, in fact, an editor's copy of Dr. Caroline's book, her manuscript, the museum collection. So we want to thank Raymond Yankels for donating that, along with another, I think there were 3 or 4 other manuscripts that he gave us last year at EMS World. So it was great to connect with him, and he actually reviewed the book and offered some notes before that went to publication. So we're coming full circle with people across the country here, all working on Freedom House at the same time, which is fantastic.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's one of our treasured artifacts, at least in the archives anyway. Of course, every time I open a book or a box, I find another treasured artifact that we can't let go away. And I'm sure everybody out there has treasured artifacts hiding in boxes too, so be sure to call us before they go out to the curb, because we are always looking to expand our collections with those hidden gems.
I have the first edition of Emergency Care in the Streets, obviously written by Nancy Caroline, tribute to Freedom House in that book. So,
yes, that's amazing, and a perfect segue, I hope, to maybe spend the last 2 or 3 minutes before we hit the hour mark here about talking a little bit about our exhibit. So we've been fortunate enough to pull together a little bit of a group to explore the history and legacy of EMS, and specifically the Freedom House ambulance crew. And what we are hoping to do, and John will probably talk louder than I will about this, which is hard to believe somebody screams louder about the history of EMS than I do. Why don't we talk a little bit about kind of the themes we're going to explore, and are there any artifacts that we're looking for? Is there anybody out there that can help us build out this exhibit? So John and I have been talking. Doc, being the leader of the ship here, is going to help us stay on path. So go ahead, John, share your 2 or 3 minute thoughts, and I'm limiting it to 2 or 3 minute thoughts about the exhibit, and our hopes to share that across the country.
Quickly, my good friend Phil Howland, who is president of the Falk Foundation, has a collection of Freedom House photos and things there. I tried to get to see them, but I really don't know how to get into the systems. I'm gonna have to talk to him, but he's the one that told me they were all there. And I hope to gain access to them to use as part of the exhibit itself, as well as the emergency care in the street. And there's some other avenues that I'm actually working on now involving other people that worked at Freedom House, and trying to reach out to them to have them offer their input and assistance and things like that. One is Councilman, who we talked about, who was a public safety director for the city of Cleveland, as well as Columbus. He's now the city council. I talked to him this morning. So these individuals, I'm going to be reaching out to get them to share their input and their life experiences, along with some, documents and memorabilia that they may have also. So it's wide open right now.
Yeah, excellent. So if you're out there, you're listening in, and you know of some hidden Freedom House gems, please reach out. If either for a loan or a donation to the museum. Our target is hopefully the spring of 2021. We'll go install both a physical exhibit, and we're going to work on building a virtual exhibit. And hopefully we can get as many of the crew members back together and have a big old coffee session with Doc, really talking about our fond memories, or maybe less fond memories, of Freedom House. All fair game over a cup of coffee. So that's I'm super excited about, and I'm just going to spill the beans that we talk every week, and it is the highlight of my week. And I'm going to adopt you both as granddads, because it's been fun. I know, now I'm sharing my age. Okay. Yeah, no, so this has been great. It's wonderful. Our next coffee session, too much talking today, is October 9th. And we put out that it was going to be a chat with the Vice President of the National EMS Museum, Mike Williams. Surprise to Mike, we've had another person reach out who's had to reschedule their later date. So it might be switching. This is going to be a surprise guest on October 9th. We'll see who shows up for the conversation. And then, very excitingly, October 10th, so that's a Saturday morning, and I know everybody is up by 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, we are having our first virtual class, and that is co-hosted with Paws and Claws 911. We're going to do a pet CPR and first aid class. Now, the important thing is that requires a pre-registration, so be sure to go to pawsandclaws911.com and register sooner rather than later so that you get all your course materials. And if you have any problems, feel free to reach out to us and we'll assist with your registration. But that is coming up quickly. So we have started our virtual coffee programs with some of the most amazing guests and historians in EMS, and now we are going to try and teach online. And so that's going to be super exciting, a big, exciting fall for us here at the National EMS Museum. I was hoping museum assistant, four-legged assistant Izzy would wake up and show her face and really encourage the Paws and Claws class, but she is snoozing, kicking me while she dreams. So maybe we'll have Izzy make an appearance on October 10th. So with that, thank you both. Thank you everybody for tuning in. It has been fantastic chatting and hearing Freedom House. We have some comments, John, for you, that people have enjoyed your stories, really like diving into the history of Freedom House, and they want you back. So I think we're going to have to look at another session with Chief John Moon here as soon as possible. So thank you all for a wonderful Friday. I am going to go fill up my coffee cup and get back to work. So thank you all very much. We'll see you soon.
So long, everybody.
All right. Excellent. We are off.